On January 13, 2020, officials from law enforcement agencies went to Anthony Todt's home in Celebration, Florida, to issue him a warrant related to fraud charges. But they were all shocked to discover 4 badly decomposing human bodies, as well as the body of a dog. The bodies found in Anthony Todd's house were not strangers but rather his own family, including his wife Megan and 3 children. The killer wasn't any armed robber or hitman but Anthony Todt himself. Anthony Todt was born on the 29th of September 1975 in Bensalem, Pennsylvania. He did not have a normal childhood like other kids in his school and was surrounded by dysfunction growing up. His father, Robert Todt, was a high school teacher who had a disturbing taste for girls much younger than him. Anthony's mother, Loretta, was a housewife who had no idea her husband was having secret affairs and sexual relationships with 16- and 17-year-old girls from his class. The problem was more serious than it seemed. Robert was engaged to a nurse at the same time and had a relationship with one of his students. All of this was happening while he was married to Loretta. After hiding his affairs and relationships, Robert decided to permanently remove his wife from the equation and marry his fiancée. At this point, Anthony Todt was just 4 years old. One night, he woke up to the sound of his mother screaming from her bedroom. Shortly after that, Anthony Todt heard a gunshot. When he went to his mother's room, she was lying on the floor, miraculously still alive. Although Loretta had been shot in the eye from point-blank range, she survived the murder attempt. As the investigation began, it was soon discovered that Robert Todt, Anthony's father, wasn't as devastated as a normal husband would be after such a shocking incident. Rather, he seemed irritated and disappointed by the fact that his wife had survived. Law enforcement authorities soon suspected that Robert had something to do with the murder attempt on his wife. This was proven right when further investigation into the matter revealed the shocking truth. Robert Todt had offered to pay one of his mentally disturbed students $900 in exchange for a special assignment, killing his wife Loretta. Robert wanted the murder to look like a case of home invasion. He gave the student a key to his house, a pistol, and instructions about where to find the bedroom where his wife would be sleeping. The incident took a serious mental toll on Tony, and he found it hard to recover. After divorcing Robert, Loretta remarried and tried her best to help her son heal from the trauma. But Tony's mental health was permanently damaged after learning that his biological father had tried to kill his mother. Despite his mental health issues, Anthony Todt was an extremely well-mannered and hard-working kid in school. Because of this, he was voted president of his class in both his junior and senior years. It was during high school that Tony met Megan for the first time. Over time, Tony and Megan grew close and even decided to pursue similar degrees. After graduating from high school, just a few months later, Tony and Megan decided to tie the knot. Soon after marrying, the couple moved from Pennsylvania to Connecticut and set up their own physical therapy business. They both practiced physiotherapy and worked together to grow their business. A few years later, Megan found out she was pregnant with the couple's first child, which forced her to stop working. The couple welcomed their first child, Alec. After a few more pregnancies and some unfortunate miscarriages, the Todt family grew to include Anthony, Megan, and their 3 children, Alec, Tyler, and Zoe. It was the perfect American family, and Tony was the best father and husband anyone could ask for. He was faithful to Megan and committed to providing for his children. Not only this, but he made sure to be there for his kids on important occasions like school events and sports practices. Megan, who had now become a full-time housewife, was equally dedicated to her children. The Todts were a well-respected family in the community. A part of this respect came from Anthony's physical therapy business, which had grown significantly over time. When money started coming in abundance, the couple decided to buy a condo in Celebration, Florida, a master-planned community near Walt Disney World Resort. It was the perfect place for the Todt family to move, as the area promised happiness, peace, and, more importantly, safety. But they soon moved to a nearby house when the condos started feeling too small for their family. The Todts were living a happy family life, going on day trips to Disney World, visiting the beach, playing games, attending piano recitals, and participating in different sports. Since Tony's business was based in Connecticut, he would return to work on his own while Megan and the kids stayed behind. Up until this point, it was a picture-perfect life for the Todt family. But in 2011, everything changed. When Megan was a teenager, she was bitten by a tick, which developed into Lyme disease, a bacterial infection. Lyme disease normally stays dormant for years and doesn't cause any health issues until something triggers it and ignites its symptoms. That's what happened to Megan in 2011. After a trip to Disney World, Megan told her husband she had been bitten by a bug. Initially, the couple thought the infection would go away after a few days, as is common in most such cases. However, it quickly turned into serious health problems. Megan was soon diagnosed with tonsillitis, hepatitis, and several other diseases. These health problems affected Megan mentally as well, and her personality completely changed with time. Sometime after her health issues began, Megan was diagnosed with depression, which only worsened. When she had another miscarriage, since Tony was in Connecticut to run the business during the week and could only be in Celebration on weekends, it made things extremely hard for Megan. To make things worse, she didn't have the kind of community support the family had enjoyed while they were in Connecticut. The only positive in the whole situation was Tony's physiotherapy business, which Megan thought was going really well. Except it wasn't. The company hadn't been making a profit for some time, and Anthony Todt was the main reason behind that. He had been using company funds to buy condos across the country, intending to rent them out to vacationers. However, those properties didn't generate the desired profit, and most were running at a loss. The little money the physiotherapy business now made wasn't enough to support 2 households in different states, cover Megan's medical bills, or pay for Tony's airfare. As the financial problems increased, Anthony Todt decided to take out a small loan to make ends meet. However, he couldn't repay it when the time came, so he took out another loan to pay off the first one, and the cycle continued. Things quickly worsened. Before long, Tony was under $100,000 in personal debt. He also owed money in company debts and 2 mortgages for the family's homes in Connecticut and Florida. Up to this point, Anthony had been hiding the financial problems from Megan but decided it was now time to tell her exactly what was going on. Instead, he decided to keep it hidden. To make things worse, he thought it was a good idea to repay their debts by committing fraud. Anthony began sending invoices to different health insurance companies and the Medicaid program for physiotherapy treatments that he had never delivered to his clients. When the money came in, Anthony repaid smaller portions of nearly 20 different loans amounting to hundreds of thousands of dollars. After some time, the insurance companies grew suspicious, and the FBI launched an investigation into the matter in 2019. When FBI agents interviewed Tony's patients, they discovered that insurance companies were billing them for 5 sessions a week when, in reality, they had only seen their physiotherapist once or twice a week. In some cases, the patients had moved out of state and hadn't seen Tony in months. These discoveries prompted FBI investigators to secretly review the documentation of the 2 clinics Tony had been operating. They immediately noticed discrepancies. There were invoices for therapy sessions on days when the clinics weren't even open. On the day of their surveillance, Tony billed insurance companies for therapy sessions for 16 different patients, despite the clinic being closed that day. The authorities decided to bring Anthony Todt in for questioning. Initially, he denied any knowledge of wrongdoing, but direct testimonies from several of his patients left him with no way to convince investigators of his version of events. He eventually admitted to fraud, but insisted that his wife didn't know anything about his fraudulent activities. He also agreed to plead guilty to any future charges if Megan was left out of it. In September 2019, Tony was stripped of his physiotherapy license, and both of his clinics were suddenly closed without prior notice to his employees. Despite his admission, Anthony wasn't under arrest yet. In November 2019, he told investigators he was going to visit his family in Florida and would return to Connecticut in the first week of December. He was allowed to travel to Celebration but never returned to Connecticut. When Christmas came, Anthony's sister informed the police in Celebration that she hadn't heard from the family in weeks. This was unusual, as they regularly kept in contact. She told authorities she was particularly worried about her brother because she knew he was involved in a fraud investigation. She also mentioned that during her last call with Anthony, he told her Megan and the kids had gotten ill and hadn't been out of bed in a few days. Since Tony never called again, she wondered if the illness was more serious than he had let on. On December 29, 2019, police officers knocked on the Todt family's home to conduct a welfare check. No one answered the door, and there were no signs of anyone occupying the house. The sheriff's department in Celebration noted in its report that the family had probably gone back to Connecticut. It took 2 more weeks to discover that the entire Todt family had been inside their Celebration home the whole time. On January 13, 2020, Investigators from the Department of Health and Human Services and police officers from the Osceola County Sheriff's Department visited the Todt family's house. They knocked on the front door for 3 days but didn't receive any response from inside. An eviction notice was also posted on the front of the house, which convinced the authorities that the Todt family was still in Connecticut. Meanwhile, Tony's sisters told the local authorities that the family had been receiving disturbing messages from Tony and Megan's numbers. This was around the same time when the FBI agent who was investigating Anthony Todt's fraud case followed him to Celebration. This was because he had failed to report back ever since leaving Connecticut to spend Thanksgiving with his family in Florida. An FBI agent was parked outside the family's house in Celebration when he noticed Anthony stepping out of the house and briefly sitting on the patio before going back inside. The agent immediately informed the local sheriff's department, and officers arrived at the house within minutes to arrest Anthony Todt. But the police also had the responsibility to check on the welfare of Megan and the kids because of the official request by the couple's families. When the officers asked Tony about Megan and the kids, he told them that Megan was sleeping and that the kids were at a sleepover. But the officers knew they had to search the house because of an unusual smell. When the officers entered the master bedroom, the smell became overwhelming and was identifiable. It was the smell of a rotting human body. The law enforcement officials were shocked to see the decomposing body of 42-year-old Megan and their 2 children, Alec and Tyler. The family dog was also lying dead in the room. As for the 4-year-old Zoe, she was nowhere to be found. It was clear that the bodies had been there for several weeks. What was even more disturbing was that Tony had been sleeping beside his dead wife the whole time. When the forensic experts started removing the bodies, they discovered that Zoe was also in the room. Her remains were so badly decomposed that they had merged with those of her mother. Anthony was immediately arrested and interrogated about what had happened at his house. Meanwhile, the victim's autopsy report revealed that all of the victims, except Zoe, had been stabbed in the abdomen. The medical examiners also wrote in the report that they were murdered around Christmas in late December 2019. Anthony initially denied having any knowledge of his wife and kids' deaths, but later he told the authorities that Megan had made a death pact with him because of their shared fear of an imminent apocalypse. He also said that Megan supported him when he went into each of his children's bedrooms to murder them. He suffocated Zoe while stabbing Alec and Tyler. According to Anthony, Megan then stabbed herself in the stomach and took her own life. Anthony Todt was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, and prosecutors indicated that they would be seeking the death penalty for the heinous crime he had committed. The authorities had both the murderer and his confession, but sometime before the trial began, Tony changed his story. For this, he sent a 26-page letter to his father and shared a new version of exactly what happened in their Celebration home. The new perpetrator in Tony's revised version of the events was none other than his deceased wife, Megan. In the letter, he wrote that he was completely innocent of all the charges against him and that his wife was the one responsible for the death of their children. She gave them Benadryl, separated them, and then stabbed them one by one. He also said in the letter that on the night of the incident, he had taken the family van to their nearby condo to do some repairs and collected a necklace for his daughter. He further added that he even played basketball with the boys on the driveway before leaving, while Megan was baking a pie for the kids. He said he never returned to the house that night and decided to sleep in the van because the oils Megan used to help with her symptoms irritated his sinuses. When he woke up the next morning, the van wouldn't start, so he had to walk back to the house. According to Anthony Todt, when he went back to the house the next morning, he found a half-eaten blueberry pie on the kitchen counter, which smelled strange. He wrote in a letter that Megan told him she had had a vision of the end of the world and had killed their children. After that, Megan stabbed and killed herself despite him begging her not to hurt herself. Tony portrayed himself as a helpless bystander throughout the letter and even wrote that he tried to contact law enforcement authorities, but there wasn't any working phone in the house. He said he put all the bodies in the master bedroom and covered them with blankets to calm them. He also shared several other versions of the incident with his sister while in jail awaiting his trial. During one call, he told his sister that he didn't remember anything about the murders of his family at all. When it was time to enter his plea, Anthony Todt pleaded not guilty to the charges of 4 murders. When the trial began, the prosecutors told the court that Tony didn't kill his family because of an apocalypse or because he wanted to free their souls. Rather, he murdered them because his fraudulent financial activities were about to be brought to light. Tony's family also provided insights into his mental health issues. According to his sister, the family was close to the community in Connecticut, But things completely changed when they moved to Celebration, Florida. In those 2 years, Tony had put on a lot of weight and was diagnosed with diabetes. She told the court that he also started keeping his work and financial details secret from others. When the time for Tony's testimony came, he pretended to be a grieving husband who was devastated by the loss of his wife and 3 children. When he was asked to talk about Megan's medical history, he was tearful at times but seemed irritated whenever he was objected to in the middle of his answer. He told the court that Megan was diagnosed with Lyme disease during her teen years. He further added that before he met Megan, she was diagnosed with a heart issue as well. He also shared how Megan developed drug-induced hepatitis. Throughout his testimony, he maintained that he was completely innocent and that his wife, Megan, was responsible for the murder of their children. He also told the jury Megan had become heavily influenced by a religious group when traditional medications failed to help her with her symptoms. According to Tony, his wife met this group online and soon developed a strong belief that the afterlife was better because she would be free of all diseases and physical ailments. He said that Megan regularly attended the meetings of the religious group through Skype, and he sometimes sat with her too. According to him, Megan was given different prayers to recite to help her with all the problems she was facing in life. He shared that Megan had started believing in a phenomenon called family lineage karma burning. She had faith that each afterlife was connected to the previous lives and that burning the family karma in the current life would help her family reach salvation, in which they would be reincarnated into a better life. Tony said the purpose of Megan's connection with the religious group was better health and better relationships with people who had abused her, verbally or otherwise, during her life. When it came to telling the jury how the murders happened, Anthony Todt shared the same version he had written in the letter to his father, but he also blended it with the story he told his sister. He said he wasn't in the house when the murders happened and didn't recall giving any recorded confession to the authorities. He said when he entered the house the next morning, Megan brought him into the room and told him she had murdered their kids. He also added that he was so shocked by all of what had happened that he fell down the stairs, smacked his head on the steps, and fractured his neck. He told the jury he didn't remember what happened next until he woke up in jail. When asked about the recorded confession, he said he had no knowledge of it and saw the video for the first time in court. However, in his recorded confession, he had told investigators that he and Megan had collectively made the plan to kill their children, and the kids were also well aware of their imminent deaths because Megan and he had gotten their consent before murdering them. Although surprisingly, he denied responsibility for murdering the family dog. In the recorded confession, he also answered the question about when he had killed his family, 2 days before Christmas of 2019. He told the jury when he saw his wife and children dead, he wanted to take his life and be with them. For that, he cut his wrists, took multiple doses of Benadryl, and at several points even tried hanging himself. He further added to his version by saying that his wife had all the phones in the house, so he yelled from the window to get help. When no one arrived to help him, he visited a local store to buy a gun and tried taking his own life. In his recorded confession, he also told investigators about the suicide note he and Megan had written together. According to the note, they, as a family, had decided to end their lives for several reasons. They wrote that they were seeing the end of the world prophecy coming true and chose to not suffer and be subjected to foreseen tortures, a cataclysmic demise, and continued agony. The note also referenced that through death, Megan would be free of pain because the ultimate goal was to be together without pain and suffering. When it came to discussing his wife's death, Anthony Todt told the court that she had stabbed herself twice in the stomach after consuming a large amount of Benadryl. But according to the autopsy report, the downward angle of the stab wounds strongly indicated that someone else was responsible for killing her. In 2022, the jury unanimously found Anthony Todt guilty of 4 counts of murder. He was sentenced to 4 life terms in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, in an unusual move, added 1 year to Anthony's sentence for animal cruelty charges stemming from him having killed the family dog.